Chapter 7 of Captivating Bible Stories for Young People. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captivating Bible Stories for Young People by Charlotte Mary Yonge. Seventh Sunday. Joseph's Brothers. First reading. We are verily guilty concerning our brother. Genesis chapter 42, verse 21. Joseph did not always stay in prison, for God gave him wisdom to tell the king of Egypt that his dreams had meant that there were going to be first 7 years of very fine harvests, and then 7 years would come of no harvests at all. So the king took him out of prison and made him a great lord, and he set to work to buy the corn that was over and above what people wanted to eat in the years of plenty, that he might store it up against the years when the corn would not grow. So when the bad harvest began, Joseph had plenty of corn, and he sold it for the king to all who wanted it. The famine was not only in Egypt, but in all the countries round, and by Joseph saw among the people that came to buy 10 of his own brothers, the same who had sold him for a slave. He knew them, for they still looked like shepherds, but they did not know him, for he had grown from a youth to a man, and was dressed like an Egyptian lord, and he would not seem to know them, though he wanted much to know what had become of his old father and his little brother Benjamin. He made as if he thought they were enemies, come to see if Egypt could be conquered when it was so bare of food. Then they told him who they were, that they were all one man's sons, and that one brother they had lost, the other was left with his father, who could not bear to part with him. Joseph would not seem to believe this, and said he must keep one of them in prison, while he sent the rest back to fetch their youngest brother, or else he could not believe them. Then, when fear and trouble came on them, they began to think how ill they had used their lost brother Joseph, and they said to each other, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother." Joseph heard them, and could hardly bear it, but still he kept to his plan. He kept Simeon a prisoner, that he might be sure of the others coming back, and sent them home to fetch Benjamin. But he would not have any of the money they had brought for the corn, and made his steward put it all back into the mouth of their sacks. When they found this out as they went home, they were much afraid, and when they came home, their father was more afraid still. After the way they had used Joseph, he thought they had killed Simeon, and wanted to kill Benjamin. They spoke truth now, but he could not believe them, and he said he could not send Benjamin, for if mischief should befall the lad, then shall you bring down my grey hairs with sorrow to the grave. Second reading. God Almighty give you mercy before the man. Genesis 43, verse 14. Joseph's brothers were soon obliged to go again and buy more corn in Egypt. Joseph had said they must bring the young brother they had told him of, or he should not believe their story. And when they said Benjamin must go, their father Jacob was greatly grieved, and showed how little he could trust them now after the way they had behaved to Joseph. He would not have let Benjamin go at all if Judah had not promised to take the greatest care of him, and Judah could be trusted. The story is so beautiful, and so easy to understand in the Bible, that I hardly like to tell it in my own words. Only think of Joseph's heart being so full when he saw his own dear youngest brother, that he could not stay with him for his tears, and went away to weep in his chamber. And yet he still tried the brothers. He wanted to see if they still were envious of the one their father loved best. So he made his steward hide his cup in Benjamin's sack of corn, and then go after them, and pretend to think they had stolen it. The sons of Jacob were no thieves, and they said the steward might search their sacks. They took them down and looked, and there was the cup in Benjamin's sack. They were all shocked, and the steward said that Benjamin must go back and be punished. How pleased they would have been long ago if such a misfortune had happened to Joseph. But now their hearts were changed, and they were shocked and grieved. Third reading. God did send me before you to preserve life. Genesis chapter 45, verse 5. All the 11 sons of Jacob turned back in grief and fear and dismay when Benjamin, the youngest brother whom Judah had promised to bring back safely to their father, was found to have the silver cup of the Lord of the land in his sack. How it came there they could not guess, but they knew that their father's heart would break if they came home and left Benjamin to be a slave. So they all came to the Lord of the land, and Judah stood up before the strange, stern, princely man, and told him how much their old father loved this youngest son, and he would be sure to die if the lad did not come home safe. And then Judah begged to stay and be a slave in Egypt instead of his brother Benjamin, for he said, if mischief befell the lad, his father would die, and that he could not bear to see. But when Judah so spake, the Lord of the land sent all the lookers on away, and wept aloud, and said that he was their own brother Joseph, whom they had sold so long ago. He would not let them be afraid. He embraced them all, and wept for joy, and asked for his father. Then he told them not to grieve for what had gone before, for God had turned it all to good, and made him be the means of saving all their lives by storing up the corn in Egypt. And now they were to go home, and tell Jacob their father that Joseph was still alive, and was a great and powerful man, and they were to fetch old Jacob their father, and their wives and their children, and all they had, and come to live with Joseph in Egypt, where he would take care of them. That was the way Joseph forgot all the ill his brothers had done to him, and forgave them, and loved them with all his heart. When the brothers came home, their father Jacob could scarcely believe such good news. But at last he said, Joseph, my son, is yet alive. I will go to see him before I die. And he came down to Egypt, and Joseph met him and fell on his neck and kissed him. And then there was joy indeed, joy as if Joseph had come back from the dead. So Jacob lived all the rest of his life in Egypt, and was happy with his son Joseph. God had given him another name, Israel, and his sons and their sons after them were always called the children of Israel. End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of Captivating Bible Stories for Young People. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captivating Bible Stories for Young People by Charlotte Mary Yonge. 8th Sunday, The Call of Moses. First reading. I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Exodus 3:7. You heard how Joseph brought his father and brothers and their children to live in Egypt. Their children's children went on living there for many years, till they had come to be a great people, and were called the children of Israel. But then the king of Egypt grew cruel to them. He made them work very hard to make bricks and build towns for him. And what was still worse, he ordered that whenever a little boy was born to the children of Israel, he should be thrown into the river and drowned. One mother hid her little baby for 3 months, and when she could not hide him any longer, she put him into a little cradle of bulrushes covered over with pitch to keep the water out, and let the cradle float on the river, leaving the little boy's sister to watch him. Presently a lady, no other than the daughter of the cruel king, came down to bathe in the river. She saw the little cradle and had it brought to her. The little baby was crying, and the lady pitied him and took him home to bring up for her own child. She wanted a nurse for him, and his sister fetched his own mother, and she became his nurse. His name was Moses, and we hear about him in the lesson today. He was not living with the king's daughter now. The king had grown angry with him because he cared for his own people, and he had had to flee away and keep sheep in the wilderness. And there he saw a great wonder. He saw a flame of fire in a bush, and yet the bush was not burnt. And God's voice spoke to him out of the fire that did not burn, and told him that the troubles of his people, the children of Israel, were to come to an end. God would save them from the cruel Egyptians, and Moses himself was to go and lead them out, and bring them to the good land that God had promised that Abraham's children should have for their own. Moses was to go and tell the king of Egypt that it was God's will that they should go. Moses was afraid at first, but God promised to help him. Second reading. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord? Exodus 5:2. Moses and his brother Aaron went and told Pharaoh God's message, that the people of Israel were to go away and worship him. But Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. And he was more cruel to the children of Israel. He made them work harder and harder, and had them beaten if they did not do all the work that was set them. They had to make bricks of clay mixed with straw, and, to punish them, Pharaoh said that they should have no straw given to them for their work, but that they must find it for themselves. And yet he required of them just as many bricks as they had had to make before. Then they cried out and were angry, and fancied Moses had brought all this trouble on them by asking for them to go. They were very miserable, and said they wished they had never listened to Moses, for he had only made them worse off instead of better. Aaron was a better speaker than Moses, and God had said he should help him, and that when God told Moses anything, Aaron should speak it to the people. So the two brothers stood telling the Israelites to bear it a little longer, and then it would be all well and over, and they would get away from making the bricks in Egypt to the beautiful country. They could not remember it themselves, but some of their fathers' grandfathers had been little boys when they came, and could tell them that it was a country not all flat, with only one river in it, like Egypt, but full of steep hills and green valleys, with bright streams running along in them, and thick woods on some of the slopes, and others laid out in gardens and vineyards. There were so many cows in the pastures, and in the wild rocks and hollow trees so many bees' nests, that it was called a land flowing with milk and honey. Should not the Israelites have liked to hear of such a place as this? But no, they were too dull to care. They thought more of whether they should get a leek or a melon to eat at supper, than of all the lovely land far away. Do you know, people are very like that when they care for now more than by and by. If we want just what pleases us today, instead of caring for what will be good for us as we grow older, we are just like the Israelites, who would not attend to Moses or to God. Third reading. I will redeem you with a stretched out arm. Exodus 6:6. The Israelites were very unhappy, for Pharaoh was very cruel to them, and they thought it all Moses' fault. But Moses told them that they would be saved, and that God was going to show them his power, so that they might always remember what he had done for them, and how he punished Pharaoh, who would not obey him. Then God made his power to be known, so that Pharaoh and the children of Israel might both learn who is the great Lord of heaven and earth, who must be obeyed. First Moses stretched out his rod, and all the water in the river turned into blood. For 7 days it was all one red, dreadful stream of blood. And when Moses held out his rod again, it turned back into pure water. But Pharaoh hardened his heart again, and would not let the people go. Then God sent a multitude of frogs that came into all the houses and bedrooms, and on the tables and everywhere. Pharaoh could not bear to have these creatures everywhere, and said if the frogs would but go away, he would let the children of Israel go. Moses prayed to God, and all the frogs died. But Pharaoh only hardened his heart again, and would not let the people go. Next, God sent lice, disgusting, unclean creatures, most horrible to the Egyptians, who could not bear anything dirty, but Pharaoh did not care. Then came swarms of flies, buzzing, stinging, and tormenting, and Pharaoh said he would allow the Israelites to go, so the flies were taken away. But no sooner were they gone than he went back again to his obstinacy, and would not let the people go. He was trying to fight against God, and so came these terrible miseries on him. If people will not do better after being punished, worse and worse is sure to come on them. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Captivating Bible Stories for Young People. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captivating Bible Stories for Young People by Charlotte Mary Yonge. 9th Sunday, The Plagues of Egypt. First reading. There is none like me in all the earth. Exodus 9:14. You remember that when God spoke to Moses out of the burning bush, it was to tell him that he should lead the children of Israel away from the people in Egypt, who were so unkind to them. But Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, said that they should not go. He could not spare them, and he did not care for God's message to him. Then God punished Pharaoh that he might let them go. 10 times God punished him, and you hear about 3 of the punishments today. First, how the sheep and cows that the Egyptians worshipped like gods fell sick and died, but still Pharaoh did not care. Then, how the people all had sores and boils that made them very ill, but still Pharaoh did not care. And then, how there was a terrible storm, thunder and lightning and rain and hail, such big hailstones as killed the men and cattle that were out in the fields, and lightning that struck them, and wind that broke every tree in the field. No wonder that Pharaoh was frightened, and begged that the storm might cease, and said that then he would let the Israelites go. So Moses prayed to God, and the thunder left off. There was no more hail, and it was all still again. But when the thunder was over, Pharaoh grew wicked again, and left off caring, and said the Israelites should not go. And thus God went on being angry with him, till at last he came to a terrible end. I am afraid some children are a little like Pharaoh when they get sulky and say, "I won't," and if they are punished, still they won't. They think nobody shall force them, and they make themselves hard that they may not do what they are told. It is very sad, for this hardness is very wrong, and you see how angry God was with this king for being obstinate. Pray to God to help you not to harden your heart, but to teach you to obey. And do not forget and do the same thing again when the punishment is over, or it will have done you no good, and you will have to be punished worse next time. Second reading. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go. Exodus 10:20. Worse troubles are sure to come when people have not taken warning by what was sent them before. Pharaoh had not minded 7 dreadful plagues, so now God sent another. He sent locusts. These were creatures like great grasshoppers. They came in swarms and clouds, and ate up every green leaf and blade of grass, and made all the earth brown and the trees dry sticks, so that there was nothing left for man or beast to eat. Then Pharaoh gave way a little, and said he would let the men go, but that their wives and children must stay, and he would not hear a word more, but had Moses and Aaron driven out from before him. Then God bade Moses to hold up his hand to heaven, and darkness came on. It was dark all day, and with darkness that might be felt. Not like night, but such black darkness that no fire or candle could give light, and no one dared to move about. But the Egyptians lay still in their places, full of horror and terror, for 3 whole days. But all the time it was light among the Israelites. The sun rose and set as usual, and thus God showed that they were his people. Then Pharaoh said that he would let them go, men, women, and children, only he must keep all their cattle. And when Moses, speaking God's words, said that the cattle must go too, and not a hoof be left behind, Pharaoh made his heart hard again, and drove out Moses, saying the people should not go, and that Moses should never see his face again. And Moses said, "Thou hast spoken well, I will see thy face again no more." So ended the last hope for Pharaoh. He was never to have another chance of bending his will and doing as God told him. Oh, let us take care not to be like him. Third reading. He smote all the firstborn in Egypt. Psalm 78:51. After the 9 sad plagues that had come upon the Egyptians, the blood for water, the frogs, the lice, the flies, the cattle plague, the boils, the hail, the locusts, the darkness, there was to be still 1 plague more, the last and worst. That would make the Egyptians let the people of Israel go, so they must be ready. There should be a terrible night. God's holy angel would pass over the whole land of Egypt that night, and in each house of the Egyptians he would slay the eldest son of the family. No one would be spared. Pharaoh's eldest son, the young prince, and the very poorest person's son. They had killed the little Israelite babies, so God would punish them by killing their children. None of the Israelites should lose their children, only there was one thing for them to do. They were that night to sup on a lamb, and with some of the blood of the lamb they were to make a mark on the doorpost. Where that mark was, the angel would pass over and do no one any hurt. But the people would be blessed and set free, because they believed God and did as he bade them. End of chapter 9.
Chapter 10 of Captivating Bible Stories for Young People. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captivating Bible Stories for Young People by Charlotte Mary Yonge. Chapter 10. The Passover. First reading. There was not a house in which there was not one dead. Exodus 12:30. This is our own gladdest Sunday in all the year, and we read of the Israelites being glad too. Glad upon the very Sunday that answered to this thousands of years ago. On this Sunday of all those thousands of years there has been joy and gladness and thanking God. And why? It was because all the troubles in Egypt were over, and God brought the Israelites out safe. There was one thing they had to do first, though. Moses bade them to do it as God commanded him. Every family was to take a lamb, and it was to be killed and roasted whole in the evening, and some of its blood was to be marked upon the doorpost of the house, and then all the family were to stand round the table, all ready dressed for a journey, and eat it fast as they could, late at night. And while all the families, fathers and mothers and children, stood up eating the lamb in this strange way, there came a great shout and cry. God had sent his angel to punish the cruel Egyptians, and every house where there was no mark of blood on the doorpost had someone dead in it, and that dead person was the eldest or firstborn son. There was a great cry, for there was death everywhere, from the son of Pharaoh who sat on his throne down to the child of the poorest slave, and even the firstborn cattle died too, because the Egyptians used to worship them. But wherever there was blood on the doorpost the angel passed over, and the eldest son was safe. Then cruel King Pharaoh was sorry and afraid at last, and said that the people who brought such trouble on him should go where they liked. Second reading. It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. Exodus 12:27. When the king of Egypt said the Israelites might go, they were all up and dressed, quite ready and only waiting, and off they set. No more making of bricks, no more slaving for the Egyptians, no more drowning of babies. They were free, and God was going to lead them to the beautiful country that long ago he had said he would give them. And so, to put them in mind how they were saved from the Egyptians, God bade them on the same day in each year to kill a lamb and roast it, and put the blood on the doorpost, and eat the lamb all standing round the table, dressed as if they were going for a journey, that they might never forget how God had made them free. This was called the Passover, because the angel passed over the houses where the blood was marked over the door, and God came in a pillar of cloud to show them the way they should go. Our blessed Lord was crucified when he had come to the feast of the Passover many years after. You know he was like a lamb, he was so pure and gentle, and his blood saves us, as that lamb's blood did the Israelites, and sets us free from the power of the devil. So we still keep the feast of being set free on this happy Easter Sunday, when we recollect that Christ was slain for our sins, but that he rose again from the dead and liveth for evermore. Third reading. The children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. Exodus 14:16. All the Egyptians were weeping over their dead firstborn sons, and the Israelites were set free, and going gladly out and away from their hard masters. But Pharaoh's hard heart turned again, and he got all his chariots and horsemen together, and went after the children of Israel to drive them back to Egypt. And when he came in sight of them, there they were all upon the shore of the sea called the Red Sea. They could not go on, for the sea was straight before them. They could not go back, for the Egyptians were behind. They were sore afraid. But God spoke to Moses and told him not to fear. They had only to stand still and see how God would save them. And God himself showed that he was with them, for the pillar of cloud went behind them instead of before, and made it dark to the Egyptians, but gave light by night to the Israelites, so the Egyptians could not get near them all night. Then God bade Moses stretch out his rod over the sea, And then there was a great wonder. The waves of the sea parted and stood up on each side in a heap, and in between there was a wide open space where the children of Israel might walk safely, dry-shod, through the very midst of the sea. Through it they went, men, women, and children, through the depths of the sea, with the waves standing still on each side of them. Pharaoh saw that they were all gone over. He chose to follow after them. But when his host was in the midst, the sea returned in its strength again and came down on the Egyptians, and every one of them was drowned. They sank like lead in the mighty waters, and the Israelites were freed from their enemies, quite away from all their trouble and all their slavery. And they sang hymns of joy to God, who had been so good to them and had now set them free. And we read about them being set free because this is the great Easter day when we give thanks to our blessed Lord for having set us free. End of chapter 10.
Chapter 11 of Captivating Bible Stories for Young People. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Philip Aldred, Nottingham, UK. Captivating Bible Stories for Young People by Charlotte Mary Yonge. The Gainsaying of Korah. 11th Sunday, The Gainsaying of Korah. First reading. The Lord will show who are his and who is holy. Numbers 16, verse 5. When the Israelites came out of Egypt, they had a long journey to go through a dreary, lonely wilderness. Moses and his brother Aaron led them, and God took care of them and fed them and kept them safe. But there were some wicked men named Dathan and Abiram who were tired of the wilderness and were angry at having Moses for their leader and master, though God had made him lead them and had done so much for them. They said they were as good as Moses, and that he should not be their prince. They did not care for God having spoken by him. Their end was so dreadful that I can hardly tell it to you. God would not let them rise up against his servant Moses, and when they would not listen or repent, he made the earth open under their feet, and they went down alive, and were swallowed up in the pit before the eyes of all the other Israelites. And so they died the most terrible death anyone ever died. It was because they set themselves up against Moses, whom God had placed over them, that he was so angry with them. Remember, God has set people over us. There are our fathers and mothers, and our clergymen and teachers, and it is our duty to obey them, as he tells us in the 5th commandment. If we are proud and saucy, it is very wrong of us. It is not likely that we should be so dreadfully punished in this life as Dathan and Abiram were. But their horrible death should make us remember that God is very angry with those that will not try to obey those that have the rule over them, and set themselves up to be bold and proud, and to say they do not care. Second reading. And seek ye the priesthood also. Numbers 16, verse 10. When God gave the commandments upon Mount Sinai, he chose that Aaron, Moses' brother, and his sons should be his priests. A priest had to offer up the sacrifices to God and to burn incense to him. Incense is made of dried plants and gums that have a sweet smell when they are burnt. The priests had brazen urns with holes at the top and chains to hold them by, and when the smoke of the incense went up, it was just as our prayers rise up to God in heaven. There were other people called Levites, who had to take care of the holy things that were used in God's service, but only the priests might offer sacrifices or incense. Now, one of these Levites, named Korah, wanted to do more. He was angry and said everybody was holy, and that Aaron took too much on himself. Now it was not Aaron who made himself priest, but God had made him so. Therefore it was wrong in Korah, but there were 250 men whom he persuaded to come and get censers and offer incense to the Lord as if they had been priests. But because they did it in pride and self-will, God was angry with them, and his fire burst out and scorched them all to death. It was only the men themselves that died, not their wives or children, and Korah's family after him were better than he was, and used to sing God's praises in the Psalms. But they always recollected that no one who was not a priest might offer sacrifice or burn incense before God. Third reading. The rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded, and brought forth buds, and bloomed blossoms, and yielded almonds. Numbers 17, verse 8. The high priest whom God chose had to offer sacrifices to him. That was, the priest slew a lamb, or a goat, or a bullock, by the altar, and gave it to God. It was to show that the Son of God would come and die to take away sin. Now he has come and died, we have left off killing creatures in sacrifice, and only make remembrance over again of his sacrifice in the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. The high priest used to wear a beautiful dress. He had a mitre on his head, with a gold plate on it, and the words, "Holiness unto the Lord." And he had a blue, red, and white robe, embroidered with gold, and round the hem little gold bells and pomegranates. He had a curious scarf called an ephod, and a beautiful breastplate made of 12 precious stones, each with the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel engraven on it. God said he would show who should be his priest. So he bade Moses desire the chief man in each tribe to bring a dry rod or staff, and lay them up all night in the holy place. The one whose rod began to grow, as if it was still on the tree, should be the high priest. When the 12 men went to look in the morning, 11 rods were dry sticks still, but one had put out green leaves, and pink buds, and white blushing flowers, like almond blossoms. It was Aaron's rod, and this was the way God let the children of Israel know that Aaron and his sons and grandsons after him were always to be priests. End of chapter 11.